if I want to connect better with my audiences, what I try to do is make a serious point and then reinforce it sometimes with humor. And I say the same for people in business. If you're in negotiations, make your serious point. After you have an opportunity to reinforce it with a little bit of appropriate humor that reinforces your point, you have a much better chance of connecting with them and have them appreciating your point of view and your message.
Well, do you think that anybody can do it, or is it some kind of a natural gift? Like, for example, were you born with this? Were you always funny when you were little, or did you develop it as a skill?
Well, my teacher used to say to me, Cunneen, you're a total clown. Whether that was... But I think that's slightly different. I would say probably I must often always had a slight gift of humor, but I never appreciate it. But here's my core point, Natasha, is that you don't have to be funny to be funny. And people kind of go, what is he talking about? But my basic view is that almost certainly in the last week, every one of your listeners would have said something or done something that put a smile on other people's face. They've heard something that put a smile on their face. And what I encourage people to do as part of my programs on adding humor to your presentation is to capture those, record them, put them into your iPhone, notebook, or whatever it is, and sometime, somewhere, you'll have the opportunity possibly to use one or two of those anecdotes or quips to reinforce your key points that you're making in the conversation or in the negotiation or in the presentation. You don't have to be funny to be funny, but what you do need to do, I believe, is you got to decide, I want to add humor to my presentation because it will help me better connect and reinforce my message.
Well, so we will hear something and then we will record that, we'll write that down. But what do you mean by that? You mean some phrases, or we will come up with jokes, we will come up with, and then we would be able to use it? Could you give an example of something that you would record?
I'll ask you a question. Over the last week, the humor researchers will tell you that the average adult laughs about 15 times a day or smiles 15 times a day. And you're probably saying, I don't do that. You probably do, but you're not paying attention to it. If over the last week we take 15 times a day by 7, that's about 100 times a week in the last week that you might have laughed or chuckled or smiled. What I encourage people to do is to just pay attention to whatever that was. And when you do that, it will help you to provide the content that you need to add the humor to the presentation. I'll give you a specific example. I speak a lot to manufacturing companies, safety organizations, and places that require attention to detail. And so I might say to, let's say, a safety conference or a manufacturing organization where safety is critical, it is in all places. I'll say, all right, you want to come in with 10 fingers and toes and leave with 10 fingers and toes, which is a nice little simple definition of safety in the workplace. But you got to pay attention to your surroundings. And let me just illustrate this with something. A couple of weeks ago, I was collecting my darling granddaughter Maggie from soccer practice with my wife. We were taking Maggie overnight. We put Maggie into the back seat of the car. My wife strapped her in and sat in beside Maggie. I then decided I would sit into the back seat of the car as well. And after a couple of seconds, Maggie looks over and she says, Grampy, you should be driving the car. And I said, Maggie, I want to, Grampy, drive the car, as only a little cute 6-year-old granddaughter could say. So I say, okay, I'll drive the car. I get out of the car. We've got a problem. We're on child lock, which also means we're on Grampy lock. So I can't get out of the car right now. I had to phone my daughter, who's about 5 minutes away at this stage, to come back and to open the car door for us. And I realized I had a humorous anecdote. We were laughing at it anyway. But when my daughter's walking over and she's breaking her sides laughing, I'm thinking, hey, this is a little humorous anecdote here I might be able to use sometime. So I have actually used it since when I'm speaking to a manufacturing organization saying, gang, you have to pay attention to detail. What is the detail that is critical in your organization? And then I might ask them, Natasha, All right, how many people here in the room have got kids who are still strapped into the back seat of the car? And you might get 10, 15% of the room hands raised. I said, all right, the next time you're strapping your little darling into the back seat of the car, think about the workplace and the equivalent child locks that may or may not cause problems in your organization if you don't pay attention to them. And for the rest of you, you may not have a kid, but when you come to the traffic lights tomorrow, quite likely you're going to see some mom or dad in their Honda Odyssey with the kid strapped into the back seat, and you can say to yourself, oh, I got to remember this concept about child locks. So that's kind of a simple little example of a little humorous anecdote that absolutely happened. And then I said, all right, how can I use it? And basically, when I'm doing my programs on adding humor to your presentation or to the workplace, I'll ask the audience, all right, what is the core lesson from that little anecdote? And they'll say, you got to pay attention. Okay? So now I'll say to them, all right, well, where or how could you use that type of anecdote in your situation? So if you're a manufacturer, you got to pay attention to safety. If you're an auditor or a financial person, you got to pay attention to detail, etc. Or a lawyer. I mean, everyone, in a sense, has got to pay attention to detail. So it's a little simple anecdote that did happen that I can use almost in any circumstance to reinforce the point about the importance of paying attention to detail and your surroundings.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really smart and convenient when you can ask other people, you can ask your audience, how would you connect? Or what is your lesson from this? What is the message? And then they basically give you the answer. Then that means that they will own it even better.
Yeah, well, that's the great thing about workshops in particular, Natasha. I do keynotes around a number of different topics. The core one would be the gift of gab, goals, attitude, behavior. But I also do workshops around that topic because it will improve people, performance and productivity, which is what my mission is. But basically what you do when you're doing a workshop compared to a keynote is that you put your point out to the audience, you ask questions about it, you ask them to discuss it. So in one sense, a 6-hour workshop does not require significant more content than a keynote does. But what it does require is for the audience to be more interactive, to think more, to do some exercises around the content. So the advantage of having good content as a keynote is that you can spread it then to a workshop or